Donovan, at 39 years old, made a steady $58,000 a year as a campus electrician for Florida State University. He knew the labyrinthine tunnels beneath the old buildings, the hum of transformers that powered thousands of students' dreams, the precise feel of a circuit breaker about to trip. His hands, calloused and sure, could diagnose a problem by the flicker of a light. He lived a life of tangible things, of copper wire and insulated pliers, of problems that had solutions. But at 7:13 p.m. on a humid Tallahassee Sunday, standing on the polished hardwood floor of his own living room, he faced a problem he couldn't fix. The air, thick with the scent of Imara's expensive $180 Joe Malone candle, felt charged and dangerous. "I just don't understand why we can't take that trip to Nassau," Imara said, her voice sharp. She was wearing a silk lounge set that probably cost more than his weekly take-home pay. "Candace and her husband are going. They just put a down payment on a boat, Donovan, and we're arguing over a 4-day vacation." Donovan kept his voice low. He was tired. It had been a long week of overtime, chasing a phantom power drain in the main library. "Imara, we've talked about this. Money is tight. We have obligations." She laughed, a short, ugly sound that didn't match her beautiful face. Her deep brown skin, usually so radiant, seemed drawn and tight around her eyes. "Obligations? You mean your obsession with saving every penny? My mother says you act like you're still living in that tiny apartment you had when we met. You have a successful wife. You can relax." He felt a familiar weariness settle into his bones. A successful wife. Imara was a regional manager for a cosmetics company, earning a good salary, but her spending always outpaced it. The obligations he spoke of were not his savings. They were hers. They were her mother's. "It's not about being cheap," he said, the words feeling useless before he even spoke them. "It's about being responsible." And that's when she said it. The sentence that severed the last thread holding their life together. She stood up, pulling the $200 silk robe tighter around her waist, and pointed a perfectly manicured finger toward the front door. "Responsible? You want to be responsible? Then be responsible for finding somewhere else to sleep tonight," she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Get out of my house. It's mine. My name is on the mortgage. My career pays for this lifestyle. You and your $58,000 a year are a guest here, and your visit is over." Donovan's world went silent. The hum of the air conditioner, the distant traffic on Thomasville Road, the ticking of the $600 designer clock on the wall, it all faded away. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. He saw the 4 years of his life, the 4 years of sacrifice, vanish in the cold fire of her eyes. He had no idea how deeply she believed her own lie, how completely she had erased his contribution, not just from her gratitude, but from her reality. The house wasn't just in her name. That was a concession he'd made when they bought it, a strategy her mortgage broker suggested to get a better rate based on her credit history. But he knew something she didn't. He knew about the deed, and he knew about the scaffolding, the invisible financial structure he had built and maintained for 48 consecutive months, the structure that was holding up her entire world, a world she had just kicked him out of. He simply nodded, the motion feeling slow and heavy. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He walked to the small table by the door, picked up his keys and his worn leather wallet, and left. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind him, the sound of an ending. Have you ever given everything to someone only to be told it was nothing? It's a feeling that hollows you out, leaving you wondering what was real. Donovan was about to find out, and so was Imara. Let us know in the comments if you've ever faced a moment where you had to walk away to keep your dignity. The facade of their life had been built with his sweat and her aesthetics. The 3-bedroom house in Benton Hills, valued at $350,000, was her pride and joy. She'd chosen the cool gray paint for the walls, the white quartz countertops that cost a staggering $8,000, the stainless steel appliances that added another $10,000 to their credit card debt. Donovan had installed all the light fixtures himself, saving them $2,000 in labor. He'd spent weekends refinishing the deck, a project that cost him $500 in materials and 60 hours of his time, while she was at a day spa getting a $300 facial and massage package. Their life was a collage of these price-tagged moments. Her white BMW 3 Series, a $43,000 lease he'd advised against, sat in the driveway next to his 2015 Ford F-150, which he'd bought used for $28,000 and planned to drive until the wheels fell off. Inside her closet, rows of designer shoes, Louboutins, Jimmy Choos, totaling at least $15,000, stood in stark contrast to his 2 pairs of steel-toed work boots and 1 pair of worn-out sneakers. He wore an $89 Timex. She wore a $4,000 Tag Heuer watch he'd bought her for their 2nd anniversary, a purchase that had wiped out his personal savings at the time. Domestic normalcy was a script they both followed. On Saturday mornings, he would be up at dawn, mowing the lawn and tending to the small vegetable garden he'd planted in the backyard. She would sleep in until 10, then emerge asking him to go to the fresh market for organic kale and artisanal cheese, for a lunch she'd seen on Instagram. He would go, of course, spending $75 on groceries that would mostly wilt in the refrigerator. He packed his own lunch every day, a turkey sandwich on whole wheat, an apple, and a bottle of water. A total cost of maybe $3. Her lunches were catered at her office, or were business meetings at upscale restaurants like Table 23, where an entree alone was $30. The biggest secret, the one that formed the foundation of their financial life, began 4 years ago, just after they were married. Imara's mother, Doreen, had a fall. Her health, already fragile, declined rapidly. She could no longer live alone. Imara was distraught. "I don't know what to do, Donovan. The good assisted living places, they cost a fortune." He remembered that night perfectly. They were in the kitchen. Rain streaked down the windows, a soft, percussive rhythm against the glass. He held her as she cried. He was a man who fixed things. This was just another problem to solve. "We'll handle it," he'd said. "Your mom will be safe and comfortable. I promise." The next day he went to the bank. He sat with a personal banker and rearranged his finances. He set up a new joint checking account, the one they would use for household expenses, but he kept his primary account, the one his FSU paycheck was deposited into, separate. From that account, he set up 2 critical recurring automatic payments. The first was for $1,530. It went directly to the mortgage company every month on the 1st. The mortgage statement came to the house addressed to Imara, and she would see the paid stamp and think her income was easily covering it. She never looked closer. She never questioned it. The second payment was for $2,250. It went directly to the Tallahassee Gardens Senior Living Facility, the best one in the county. It was a beautiful place, with lush gardens, private rooms, and 24-hour nursing care. Doreen loved it. Imara loved that her mother was there. The bill was sent electronically to an email address Donovan had set up just for that purpose. Imara never saw it. She just knew her mother was taken care of. The total came to $3,780 every single month for 48 months. That was $181,240 of his post-tax income. It was the lion's share of his salary. It left him with just enough to cover his truck payment, his insurance, and a little bit for personal expenses. He never complained. He never mentioned it. He thought it was his duty as a husband, an act of service, a quiet testament to his love. He was building a life for them, a stable, secure life. He thought she knew on some level what he was doing. He thought she appreciated it. He had no idea how wrong he was. The facade was perfect, but it was hollow. and he was the only one who knew the truth of its construction. The cruelty hadn't started with that Sunday night command. It had been a slow erosion, a series of small, cutting remarks that had chipped away at his sense of worth within the marriage. The accumulation of these moments was an outrage he had swallowed, again and again, for the sake of peace. There was the dinner party 6 months ago. Imara had invited her boss, a sleek, silver-haired woman named Cynthia, and her husband. Imara spent a week planning the menu, buying a new $600 dress for the occasion. Donovan grilled steaks in the backyard, making sure they were cooked to a perfect medium rare. As he brought the platter to the dining table, he overheard Imara talking in the kitchen. "Donovan is just so practical," she'd said to Cynthia, a light, dismissive laugh in her tone. "He works with his hands. It's sweet, really. He keeps the lights on, literally." The condescension was a physical blow. He wasn't her partner. He was a quaint handyman, a useful piece of the scenery in the grand production of her life. He placed the steaks on the table and smiled, the anger a hot coal in his stomach. Then there was the issue of his family. His sister, Keisha, a single mother who worked as a teacher's aide, was struggling. Her car had broken down, a repair that was going to cost $900 she didn't have. Donovan, without a second thought, wanted to help her. He brought it up with Imara one evening as they watched television. "I was thinking of sending Keisha a little money to help with her car," he said, during a commercial break. Imara didn't even look away from the screen. "How much is a little?" "900, he said. She finally turned to him, her eyebrows raised in disbelief. $900? Donovan, are you serious? We are not a charity. Your sister needs to learn to manage her money better. We have our own expenses. I've been wanting to get the living room repainted. That alone is going to be over $1,000. This is my sister, Imara. Her getting to work is more important than the shade of beige on these walls." "It's not beige, it's greige," she snapped. "And it's the principle of the matter. You can't just go handing out money." What kind of message does that send? He ended up sending Keisha the money from his dwindling personal funds, telling her it was a gift from both of them. He felt a profound sense of shame, not for helping his sister, but for having to hide his decency from his own wife. The lie sat between them, another brick in the wall she was building. The most painful scene, the one that truly laid bare the chasm between them, happened at Tallahassee Memorial Hospital 2 months before the end. Doreen had been admitted for a minor respiratory infection. They went to visit her together after work. Donovan stopped to buy her a bouquet of her favorite yellow roses, a small $25 gesture. When they entered the room, Doreen was propped up in bed, looking frail. "Donovan, my sweet boy," she'd said, her voice raspy, "you always know how to brighten up a room." Imara immediately took over. She fluffed her mother's pillows, checked her IV drip, and began a long, detailed complaint to the nurse about the quality of the hospital food. She ignored the flowers completely. Later, as they were walking to the parking garage, Imara turned on him. "You have to stop doing things like that," she said, her voice cold. "Doing what? Bringing your mother flowers?" "Yes. It makes me look bad. It makes it seem like I'm not thoughtful enough. You're the son-in-law. Your job is to support me, not to upstage me. Everything with you is a competition, isn't it?" He stopped in the middle of the concrete garage, the smell of exhaust fumes thick in the air. He was stunned into silence. He had spent 4 years and over $180,000 ensuring her mother had the best care money could buy, and he was being accused of upstaging her with a $25 bouquet of roses. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a complete and utter failure of her to see him, to see his heart, to see anything beyond the reflection of herself. The outrage had accumulated, layer by silent layer. It was in the way she handed him the credit card bills with a sigh, as if the debt was a mystery she had no part in creating. It was in the way she talked about his friends from the FSU maintenance department as your little work buddies. It was in the casual cruelty of her words, the constant reminders of his lower salary, his simpler tastes, his role as a supporting character in her story. Each remark, each dismissive gesture was a small betrayal. The Sunday night explosion wasn't the beginning of the end. It was just the moment the foundation he had so carefully built finally gave way under the unbearable weight of her contempt. The first night, Donovan slept in his truck in a quiet corner of the FSU parking lot, the familiar campus lights a strange sort of comfort. The next morning, at 6:47 a.m., he was at his workshop, the smell of ozone and old machinery a welcome balm. He felt a strange calm, a clarity that comes after a storm. The anger was still there, a low, steady flame, but it was being channeled into purpose. He wasn't going to fight fire with fire. He was simply going to turn off the water. He spent the day in a haze of routine, replacing a faulty ballast in a lecture hall, running new conduit in the science building. But in his mind, he was methodically disassembling the life he had shared with Imara. During his lunch break, he didn't eat. He sat in his truck with a pen and a notepad from the university supply closet and made a list. 1. New apartment. 2. Bank. 3. Lawyer. 4. Deed. That evening, he found a small, furnished, one-bedroom apartment for rent near the campus for $950 a month. It was clean, cramped, and blessedly anonymous. He paid the first month's rent and security deposit in cash, a total of $1,700 from the emergency fund he kept separate from everything else. The walls were thin, and the furniture was a collection of mismatched pieces from the 1980s. But it was his. It was a sanctuary. The next day, Tuesday, he took a personal day. At 9:05 a.m., he walked into the main branch of their bank downtown. The air was cool and smelled of polished floors and money. He sat down with a personal banker, a kind-faced woman named Sarah. "I need to close a joint checking account," he said, his voice even. He slid Imara's debit card and his own across the desk. "And I need to have my direct deposit, which is currently split, redirected entirely into my personal savings account," Sarah typed at her keyboard. "Okay, Mr. Williams, I can do that for you. The current balance in the joint account is 8714. Per protocol, we can issue a cashier's check for that amount, split between the two account holders." "That's fine," Donovan said. $87. That's what was left after her weekend shopping. Next, he addressed the auto-pays. "I have 2 large automatic payments that come out of my personal account each month. I need to cancel them immediately." He gave her the details. The $1,530 payment to the mortgage company, the $2,250 payment to Tallahassee Gardens Senior Living. Sarah's eyes widened slightly as she looked at the payment history. "These have been running like clockwork for a long time, sir." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," he said. The finality in his voice left no room for argument. He walked out of the bank at 9:42 a.m., feeling lighter than he had in years. The financial scaffolding was gone. The structure was now unsupported. All he had to do was wait. His last stop was a small law office on North Monroe Street. He had an 11 a.m. appointment with a man named Marcus Thorne, an attorney who specialized in real estate and family law. Donovan had found him online, impressed by his no-nonsense reviews. He sat in a worn leather chair opposite Thorne's mahogany desk. He explained the situation calmly and concisely. He told him about the house, the mortgage, the verbal agreement they had. He didn't mention Doreen's bills. It wasn't legally relevant, but it was the heart of the matter for him. "She told you to get out of her house?" Thorne asked, leaning forward. "Yes. She believes because her name is on the mortgage, It's hers. And the deed. Donovan reached into the manila envelope he was carrying. He pulled out a crisp, clean document and slid it across the desk. It was the original deed to the Benton Hills house, dated 6 months before his wedding to Imara, with one name on it, Donovan Williams. He had bought the property as an investment with a small inheritance from his grandmother, before he even knew Imara was the woman he would marry. When they decided to build their life there, he'd kept the deed in his name, a simple matter of practicality he'd never thought would become a weapon. Thorne picked up the document. He read it carefully. A slow smile spread across his face. "Mr. Williams," he said, laying the deed back on the desk with reverence. "This isn't her house. It's not even a marital asset in the traditional sense. You owned it free and clear before the marriage. She has contributed nothing to the equity. You have been paying the mortgage. This document," he tapped it with his finger, "is a fortress. She has absolutely no claim to it." Donovan felt a wave of cold, hard relief. "So what happens now?" "Now? Nothing," the lawyer said. "You've already done the hard part. You've walked away and you've cut off the funds. The consequences will find her on their own. We'll just sit back and wait for her to make the next move. And when she does, we will be ready." He left the lawyer's office at 11:58 a.m. and went back to his new, empty apartment. He sat on the lumpy sofa and looked out the window at the unfamiliar street. For 4 years, he had been playing a part, pretending that their life was a partnership of equals. He'd feigned ignorance of her spending, of her disdain. He'd acted normal while he was being systematically devalued. Now the acting was over. He wasn't playing dumb anymore. He was just playing quiet. And he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his soul that the silence would be deafening. For the first week, there was only a trickle of confused texts from Imara. Monday, 8:12 a.m. "Where are you? You didn't come home." Tuesday, 4:30 p.m. "The joint account is overdrawn. I tried to buy groceries. How embarrassing. Did you move money without telling me?" Thursday, 9 p.m. "Donovan, this isn't funny anymore. Call me." He didn't respond to any of them. He blocked her number on his phone but kept the voicemail active. He needed a record. He continued his life with a quiet, methodical precision. He went to work. He came home to his small apartment. He bought a cheap pot and pan from a thrift store and cooked himself simple meals. He read books from the public library. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't realized was missing. He was living on his own terms, within his own means, for the first time in years. The first real tremor hit 30 days after he left. It was a Friday. He knew because the payment for Doreen's assisted living facility was due on the 1st of the month, and they had a 30-day grace period. He was sitting in his apartment when his phone buzzed with a new voicemail. It was Imara. Her voice was no longer confused. It was laced with panic and fury. "Donovan, I just got a call from Tallahassee Gardens. They said Mom's account is past due for 30 days, and if it's not paid by Monday, they're going to have to begin transition proceedings. What the hell is going on? Did you forget to pay it? You always handle that. Call me back. This is not a joke. This is my mother." He listened to the message twice. You always handle that. She'd said it so casually, an admission of the very truth she had always ignored. He felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just a quiet confirmation that he had done the right thing. The weekend passed in silence. Then, on Monday afternoon, another voicemail. This one was frantic, the words tumbling over each other. They called again. They want the $2,250 plus a late fee. I tried to pay it with my credit card, and it was declined. All my cards are maxed out. Donovan, where is the money? What did you do? You are a cruel, cruel man to do this to my mother, to an old woman. How could you? He saved the message. The narrative was already shifting. It wasn't about her kicking him out. It wasn't about her lies. It was about his cruelty. He had made a critical mistake in her eyes. He had stopped being useful. A week later, another message. This one was tearful, pleading. Donovan, please, I went to the bank. They said you closed the joint account. They said you stopped the payments. I don't understand. Why would you do this? I know I said some things on Sunday. I was angry. I didn't mean it. You know I didn't mean it. We can fix this. Just pay the bill for my mom. Please. We can talk about everything else later. Just fix this. He almost felt a pang of something, but then he remembered the sting of her words. Get out of my house. He remembered the condescension. He keeps the lights on, literally. The memory was a shield. He did not call back. The coordinated strike was entirely passive. He didn't have to lift a finger. The systems he had set up were now being dismantled by their own automated processes. The first domino, Doreen's care, had fallen. The second, much larger domino, was about to follow. The mortgage payment was due on the 1st. It was now the 10th of the second month. The bank had a much shorter grace period. Around day 45, a certified letter arrived at the Benton Hills house. He knew this because Imara left him another voicemail, her voice a choked whisper of disbelief. A letter came from the bank. It says the mortgage is in arrears. It says we're in default. Donovan, this has to be a mistake. This is my house, my credit. What is happening? This will ruin me. You have to call them. You have to tell them you made a mistake. He could picture her standing in the living room, the one with the grayish walls she cared so much about, holding a piece of paper that was unraveling her entire reality. She still didn't get it. She still thought this was a problem he had created, a mess he was obligated to clean up. She had no idea that she was simply experiencing the natural consequences of her own actions. He had not created the storm. He had simply stepped out of the rain and taken his umbrella with him. The downpour she was feeling was the life she had built, and she was discovering too late that it was made of paper. The consequences cascaded, each one landing with the brutal finality of a gavel. Imara's carefully curated world fell apart, not with a bang, but with a series of official notices and humiliating phone calls. First, there was Doreen. The Tallahassee Gardens Senior Living Facility, a private entity billing at $2,250 a month, had a strict payment policy. After 45 days of non-payment and unanswered calls, they officially discharged her. Imara, with no money and no options, had to place her mother in a state-funded nursing home on the west side of town. Donovan knew the place. He'd once done some electrical work there. It was clean but grim. The rooms were shared, the hallways smelled of disinfectant and despair, and the overworked staff did their best with limited resources. Doreen went from a private suite with a garden view to a small bed separated from a stranger by a thin curtain. The fall from comfort was steep and immediate. Imara's guilt and shame were palpable in her next voicemail, a broken string of sobs and accusations. Next was the house. The default notice was followed by a pre-foreclosure warning. The bank didn't care about her feelings or her credit score. They cared about the $1,530 monthly payment that had now been missed twice. With penalties and fees, the amount owed was already over $3,200. Imara, whose salary was almost entirely consumed by her car lease, credit card minimums, and lifestyle expenses, had nothing. She was forced to call a lawyer. This is when Donovan's lawyer, Marcus Thorne, received the call he'd been waiting for. He met with Imara and her attorney in a sterile conference room. Imara, Thorne later told Donovan, looked haggard. The designer clothes seemed to hang off her, her usual confidence replaced by a brittle fear. Her lawyer started with bluster. My client, Ms. Williams, has been the primary financial contributor to the household. She is seeking sole possession of the marital home and assumes Mr. Williams will be rectifying the mortgage default he maliciously caused. Thorne listened patiently. When the other lawyer was finished, he didn't argue. He simply slid a single piece of paper across the polished table. It was a certified copy of the deed. My client owned the property located at 1821 Oakmont Drive outright, 6 months prior to the marriage, Thorne stated, his voice calm and factual. It is, by Florida statute, non-marital property. Your client has no legal claim to it whatsoever. In fact, one could argue she's been living there rent-free for 4 years, while my client paid the mortgage on a property that was legally his to begin with. The room went silent. Imara's face went white. She stared at the deed, at Donovan's name, at the date stamped in the corner. Her entire argument, her entire sense of ownership, dissolved in that single moment of legal truth. Her lawyer shuffled his papers, his bluster completely gone. The meeting was over in less than 15 minutes. The financial collapse was swift. To avoid foreclosure proceedings being filed in her name, which would have destroyed her credit for a decade, Imara was forced to sign a quitclaim deed, relinquishing any imagined interest in the house. She had 30 days to vacate the property. To come up with the money for a new apartment and moving expenses, she had to sell her beloved BMW 3 Series. She couldn't find a buyer to take over the $43,000 lease, so she was forced to terminate it early, costing her a penalty of nearly $5,000, which she had to borrow from her colleague, Candace. She traded it for a 10-year-old, $8,000 Honda Civic with a dent in the fender. Her job, once a source of pride, became a source of humiliation. Without the fancy car and the expense account she'd been using for personal items, her image as a successful regional manager began to crack. Her performance suffered. 3 months after Donovan left, her boss, Cynthia, called her in for a review. Citing missed targets and a lack of focus, they put her on probation. The final, crushing blow was the divorce settlement. With no claim to the house and significant personal debt, Imara walked away with nothing but the clothes on her back and the balance on her credit cards, which totaled over $32,000. Donovan, on the other hand, kept his house, his truck, his savings, and his pension. He didn't ask for a penny from her. He didn't need to. The simple act of removing his support was enough. The consequences weren't his revenge. They were the invoice for a life she had refused to pay for. He had held up the sky for her, and when he walked away, she was shocked to find it was heavy. 6 months after that fateful Sunday, the Benton Hills house was quiet. The overpowering scent of Joe Malone candles was gone, replaced by the faint smell of sawdust and fresh paint. Donovan had moved back in a month after Imara had moved out. He'd spent weeks purging the space of her influence. The expensive silk curtains were replaced with simple blinds. The fussy, uncomfortable furniture was sold, and he bought a sturdy, comfortable sofa from a local craftsman for $1,500. The walls were no longer a pretentious grayish, but a warm, clean white. The house felt bigger, breathing with a sense of peace it had never known. Donovan found he enjoyed the solitude. He enjoyed the quiet rhythm of his own life. On Saturdays, he would wake up with the sun, not with a list of demands. He would drink his coffee on the back deck, the one he had built with his own hands, and listen to the birds. His greatest joy was the garden. He had expanded it, tilling the earth himself, building raised beds from reclaimed lumber. He planted tomatoes, cucumbers, bell peppers, and collard greens. He found a deep satisfaction in the work, in the feeling of the rich Florida soil under his fingernails, in watching something grow from a tiny seed into something that could sustain him. The garden was real. It was tangible. It was a testament to patience and care, things his marriage had lacked. One afternoon, his phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. He answered cautiously. "Is this Donovan Williams?" a woman's voice asked. It was a social worker from the county nursing home. "I'm calling about Doreen Scott. We have you listed as a secondary contact." Donovan's heart tightened. "Is she okay?" "She's fine physically," the woman said, "but her spirits are very low. She's having a hard time adjusting. She asks for you sometimes." He felt a wave of something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't love. Not anymore. It was a lingering sense of duty, a whisper of the promise he had made 4 years ago in the rain. He knew it wasn't his responsibility. He knew he owed them nothing. But the thought of the old woman, who had always been kind to him, wasting away in that grim facility gnawed at him. The next day he went to visit her. The nursing home was exactly as he remembered. Sterile, bleak, filled with a quiet sadness. He found Doreen in a small, cluttered day room, staring blankly at a television. She looked smaller, her radiant skin now dull and papery. When she saw him, her eyes filled with tears. "Donovan," she whispered, reaching a trembling hand for his. "I knew you'd come." They didn't talk about Imara. They didn't talk about the house or the money. He just sat with her, held her hand, and listened as she talked about her childhood in Quincy. Before he left, he spoke to the administrator. He arranged for a small monthly stipend of $200 to be added to her account, to be used for better toiletries, snacks, and a private telephone line in her room. It was a small sum, but it was what he could offer. It was an act of grace, not obligation. He was closing the chapter, but he was choosing to write the last sentence with kindness. Imara agreed to meet him one final time at a neutral coffee shop to sign the last of the divorce papers. She looked like a different person. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore no makeup. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by a simple blouse and jeans. She looked tired, but for the first time, she looked real. She signed the papers without reading them. "I'm sorry, Donovan," she said, her voice barely audible over the hiss of the espresso machine. "For everything. I was a fool. I had a good man, and I threw it all away because I was chasing I don't even know what." He looked at the woman across from him, the woman he had once loved enough to carry the world for. He felt no anger. He felt no triumph. He only felt a quiet, profound sadness for what they had lost, and a deep, abiding peace for what he had found. "I know," he said, and he meant it. He accepted her apology, not for her, but for him. It was the final step in letting go. "I wish you well, Imara. I hope you find what you're looking for." He stood up, left his half-finished coffee on the table, and walked out into the bright Tallahassee sunlight. He didn't look back. A year passed. The sun rose and set. The seasons turned. Donovan's life settled into a new, comfortable rhythm. The house on Oakmont Drive was no longer just a structure of wood and drywall. It was a home. His home. The garden in the backyard was thriving. His tomato plants were heavy with fruit, the collard greens were lush and vibrant, and a patch of sunflowers stood tall against the fence, their faces turned toward the sun. He'd become a fixture in his neighborhood. On Saturdays, he would leave a basket of fresh vegetables on his porch with a small sign that said, "Help yourself." His neighbors, in turn, would leave him jars of homemade jam or fresh-baked bread. He had built a small community, a network of simple kindnesses that asked for nothing in return. He was still an electrician at FSU, still making his $58,000 a year. But he felt richer than he ever had. His wealth wasn't measured in bank statements or designer labels. It was in the taste of a sun-warmed tomato from his own garden. It was in the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. It was in the peace that settled over him as he sat on his back deck at sunset, watching the fireflies begin to dance in the twilight. He learned that Imara had moved to Atlanta, taking a lower-paying job with another company. He heard she was living in a small apartment and slowly paying down her debts. He hoped she would be okay. He had forgiven her, for his own sake. Forgiveness, he realized, wasn't about excusing the other person's behavior. It was about refusing to let their behavior continue to poison your own heart. It was about taking the key to your own prison out of their pocket and putting it back in your own. True wealth isn't what you have, but what you are. It's not the house, but the home you build inside it. It's not the money you earn, but the character you forge when no one is watching. Donovan had been told to get out of a house he was paying for, and in walking away, he had walked into a life that was truly his own. He had lost a wife, but he had found himself. And in the quiet earth of his garden, under the vast Florida sky, he had finally, truly come home. What do you think is the most important part of building a life? Is it the financial security or the peace you have at the end of the day? Share your thoughts with us below. And if this story resonated with you, please consider liking and subscribing for more stories about finding strength in the face of betrayal.